Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the devastating earthquakes in Venezuela, a country where 8 million people were in need of humanitarian aid before the earthquakes, according to the United Nations. Joining us to discuss what the administration is doing to help a country Trump claims he already runs is David Smilde, a professor of human relations and senior associate at the Center for Inter-American Policy and Research at Tulane University. He has published 5 books on Venezuela and has studied the country for over 34 years, living there for most of that time. And he is the co-author of The Paradox of Violence in Venezuela, Revolution, Crime, and Policing During Chavismo. The author of the Substack Venezuela and the United States. He has an article at Responsible Statecraft, Under Team Trump's Eye, Venezuela Makes Move Towards Elections. Then we'll look into the aggressive campaign by DHS and ICE to criminalize protests against ICE cruelty in Texas and Minnesota by using Trump's National Security Presidential Memo 7, under which the Department of Justice requires no crime to actually have been committed. They only need indicators which are broad enough to sweep up millions of Americans considered anti-American, anti-capitalist, anti-Christian, and extremist on migration. Joining us is David Schultz, a professor of political science at Hamline University and the University of Minnesota School of Law. He's the author of 30 books and various articles on American politics, ethics, election law, and the media, most recently Election Law and Democratic Theory, and American Politics in the Age of Ignorance, Why Lawmakers Choose Belief Over Research. His latest book is Generational Politics in the United States, From the Silence to Gen Z and Beyond. Then finally we'll speak with Stephen Greenhouse, a senior fellow at the Century Foundation, who was previously a reporter for the New York Times, where he covered labor and the workplace for 19 years. He also served as a business and economics reporter and a diplomatic and foreign correspondent. He's the author of The Big Squeeze, Tough Times for the American Worker, and Beaten Down, Worked Up, The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor. And we will discuss his latest article at The Guardian, Cracks Are Showing in Trump's White Blue-Collar Base. And before we begin with Trump having bombed 7 countries and started a war against Iran, while at home his ICE thugs terrorize and break up families, murdering American citizens in the process, the need to rid the country of the deeply unpopular Trump cacistocracy and his clown car cabinet could not be more urgent. But these crooks and criminals would do anything to stay in power, as their billionaire buddies buy up the mainstream media and the mob boss intimidates Republican politicians. Only people power can beat money power, and we need all hands on deck as we continue to do our part, delivering a daily public service, providing the facts and evidence to inform the majority of what they are up against and how to win back our country, our decency, and the respect of the community of nations. You can help save America's 250-year-old democracy by making a tax-deductible donation at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org, and thank you. And joining us now, David Smilde, a professor of human relations and a senior associate at the Center for International Policy and Research at Tulane University, and is the author of the Substack Venezuela and the United States, and has an article at Responsible Statecraft, Under Team Trump's Eye, Venezuela Makes Move Towards Elections. Welcome to Background Briefing, David Smilde.
Thank you, Ian.
So there's a massive humanitarian catastrophe underway in Venezuela from the earthquakes that have devastated the country. And even before these earthquakes happened, almost 8 million people in Venezuela were in need of humanitarian aid, according to the United Nations. So given that back in January, when Donald Trump was asked by a reporter who was leading Venezuela, Trump said, "We're in charge." So Trump owns Venezuela, according to him. What's he doing about helping the people in desperate need?
Well, so far there's been promises. There haven't been a whole lot. The United States has sent a couple of rescue teams, search and rescue teams, just like any number of other countries have, El Salvador and Brazil, Switzerland have sent. So the U.S. has done that, and they've made a lot of promises, but so far it's been limited to that. There was, I think, the head of the Southern Command came and met with the head of the Venezuelan military, and so there was that. But I think it'll depend on what's to come because we're in the search and rescue phase, but this is going to go on for a long time, and because the needs in terms of infrastructure, in terms of housing, thousands of people are now without a home. No, healthcare was already in a grave situation before this, and now it's completely overwhelmed. And so, in the coming weeks and months, there's going to be real need for resources and help in rebuilding Venezuela. And that's, I think, well, where we could see, the U.S. have an input. I think it'll be a real test for the Trump policy.
Well, the State Department have said that the U.S. has mobilized search and rescue teams in coordinating deliveries of medical supply, and they've unlocked a $150 million humanitarian aid fund. So I guess I don't know what unlocked means.
Yeah, I mean, from what I can tell, they're funneling since USAID doesn't exist anymore. It looks like they're funneling that through the United Nations and through some designated aid agencies, and so which I think is fine. We'll see. Hopefully, that aid is well directed, and that means that there will be a good response in the coming weeks and months. No, because within a couple of weeks, this is going to be out of the news cycle, and it's just going to be the painstaking process of rebuilding. And that's where you actually will need some aid, and you'll need some. The United States has control over Venezuela, the country's finances right now, and in a very non-transparent way. And so this will be a real test of what happens because these kind of disasters can actually, lead to an economic recovery and rebuilding, as happened in China in 2008. No, it can actually be an opportunity, or it can be just lead to a cycle, a downward spin, like we've seen in Nicaragua and in Haiti. And what that really depends on are the quality of institutions, the transparency, how well resources are used. And so I think in that case as well, this will be a real test of the Trump administration's ability to actually work with Venezuelan government to help it perform in an adequate way that actually meets people's needs.
But in terms of rescues efforts after an earthquake, apparently, there's been a 7.2 and a 7.5 magnitude quakes. Normally, the first 48 hours is the critical period to get people out from under the rubble. And that deadline has passed. Has the Venezuelan government, in other words, did they miss the boat here?
Absolutely, it's been a real wash. I mean, I think from the beginning, these type of disasters are a real test for governments and really distinguish leaders in their abilities. And you think of, for example, George W. Bush, his response to 9/11 really carried him through his first. It was very popular. It carried him through his first term into reelection. Then his disastrous response to Katrina here in New Orleans really undermined him, and I think undermined the rest of his second term because people were really hard. It was hard to forget just how bad he dropped the ball. And so in this case, it's been quite revealing because Delcy Rodriguez, immediately snapped into action. She immediately declared a state of emergency, had publicized meetings. She immediately communicated with the international community and accepted international aid. All of that was really good. But then since then, it's just been a big whiff. I mean, there's been very little presence of the national government, the armed forces, or really anything. It's been citizens, it's been firefighters, it's been police officers, it's been local, politicians that and municipal governments that have been digging people out with their hands. And so it's what it really has sort of revealed is just the abject lack of state capacity in the Venezuelan government. I mean, Delcy Rodriguez leads a government that basically can sign agreements with other countries or with international corporations for, oil exploitation or minerals, but really has no capacity to do really anything. It also sort of reveals the military has been sort of sidelined. They were not included in the state of emergency. And that is sort of as it should be because it should be civilian institutions. But given the enormity of the disaster, this is really only the military would have the capacity to come in with heavy equipment because you just can't do this with your hands, and pickaxes. And so that has just been completely lacking. So it's really kind of revealed, it's almost sort of led to sort of the empress without clothes. You know, the empress has no clothes because it's just revealed that she's presiding over a state with very little capacity.
So why weren't the military brought into this aftermath immediately?
Well, it's it's a source of a lot of speculation. On the one hand, that's the way it should be because it should be, there's something called civil protection service there. They should lead it. But with something like this, they do not have the heavy equipment. They do not have the manpower to actually do this. This is where you actually would need the military. But she didn't even include them. They've been very much in the background. And part of that is, she's a civilian president. She doesn't have huge support in the military. And so it's led to speculation that she just doesn't really want them out of their barracks and out there. But in the meantime, that means that civilians have been, doing this with their hands. And, in the first 36 hours. I mean, now you're starting to get some really professional rescue teams that are coming in and taking over, and that's really good. And the government has sort of snapped into sort of coordinating it. But that first window, that key window, was really just a wash, and it was just civilians saving civilians.
Right, but Trump, in effect, owns Dulce Rodriguez. She's still got this threat of U.S. criminal indictments alleging corruption and money laundering charges looming over her, and he's basically kept her in place with the threat that she could be toppled at any moment if she doesn't play ball. And meanwhile, when you think about what the operation cost to get rid of Maduro, the so-called Operation Absolute Resolve, that was about over $200 million. And this week, Trump said that the United States has recovered its war costs, in other words, the 200 million plus, 28 times over through its oil sales, or oil theft, if you want to put it that way, or oil expropriation, I guess is the right way to put it, which would mean Trump's roughly taken 5.7 billion out of this impoverished country.
Yeah, I mean, I think what has happened so far is that the Trump administration has focused on economic recovery and like macroeconomic recovery, like getting oil flowing and mining contracts and things like that. And they've controlled the funds. They've controlled the funds, so a lot of the what has been produced has not been sent back into the country. And so, what this reveals what's going on, this lack of state capacity, it reveals two things. One, that Venezuela needs its resources. The resources that are coming from this oil sales have to get back into the country. No, and furthermore, there has to be change and reform beyond simply the economy and beyond demanding for elections. No, there has to be reforms in the state, in the judicial sector, and the armed forces, the security sector. I mean, there's got to be more reform and more work done on developing these other sectors because you end up, we're seeing right now there is no development. The state is basically dysfunctional. The only thing you can do is sign contracts. And so, for any sort of adequate push forward, the Venezuelans, the Delcy Rodriguez government and the Trump administration have to focus on something other than just getting oil flowing again. There's got to be much more development of the state.
Well, meanwhile, the Trump administration are preventing the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Prize for winning an election that Maduro stole. She's stuck here in the United States. They won't let her go.
Yeah, that's right. She has been trying since the January 3, and she's been repeatedly marginalized, and she was marginalized there. That was the biggest shocker. Even more shocking than the military operation was that they sidelined her and decided to work with Delcy Rodriguez. Then just last week they sent another more moderate opposition figure to go to start negotiating with the regime, and to negotiate changes in democratic institutions and elections and judicial reform, all of which are quite necessary. And they've chosen to work with her instead of Maria Corina Machado. And I think it's interesting because they, they themselves are not moderate. So they, the Trump administration and Marco Rubio, they're not known to be, working across the aisle and bipartisan. They themselves tend to be sort of zealots, but they want to marginalize Maria Corina Machado for the same reason. And I think for them, the issue is that they want to spend as little political capital on Venezuela as possible. They want it to be sort of a quiet, prosperous partner that can provide the United States with with energy security, and provide a place in which Venezuelan immigrants can be returned to without a problem. And that's what their goal is. They're not that interested really in democracy or in what people want. They want, this kind of stability. And I think they'd be quite happy with a Saudi Arabia and the Caribbean. And so, to their credit, they are, they put forward this person is going to be negotiating some of these issues. But it's notable that they continue to marginalize Maria Corina Machado, who is the most popular leader, and in favor of somebody that they think that they can control a little bit more and is going to not cause a ruckus. And so that is the priority in this case, and that's why they keep marginalizing Machado.
Right, but along with Delcy Rodriguez, the U.S. is keeping in place the Interior Minister Cabrillo, who's the main torturer and imprisoner of all the opposition. I think they haven't
Cabello, yeah, I'm sorry, just said Diosdado Cabello and the head of the defense minister now, Gonzalo Lopez, is also someone who's accused torturer. And so there's that, and there's all kinds of laws that have persisted still that sort of keep a muzzle on civil society and on the media. No, there's that allow the government to arrest people for terrorism, for criticizing the government, and so there's all kinds of elements that have not changed because the focus so far has simply been on elections. I think there's something to be said for a go slow process of change. Oftentimes we tend to think of these transitions as something that just happens overnight. And so but there's got to be progress. There's got to be progress on these things, and we haven't really seen that. Hopefully, we will. Although this earthquake seriously, I think, complicates that negotiation effort.
Well, it just seems like this poor country is, getting punishment upon punishment because of the misrule of Chavez and then Maduro, and a third of the country fled abroad, and it's been completely dysfunctional. And this criminal elite, have been milking the place, and then Trump comes in and kidnaps the leader and keeps all these crooks in place, and is getting as much oil out as he can. And she's signing, the puppet government under the control of the United States is signing all kinds of meaningless contracts because there's no follow through. And then on top of this, Mother Nature strikes in this cruel way. I don't know. I mean, what are you hearing from the people? They must be just absolutely bereft.
Well, at this point, most people have been, in constant contact with people there. People are in survival mode. People are very much thinking of, what's right in front of them, where their loved ones are, what can be done, and there hasn't been a whole lot of kind of stepping back to reflect on what's happening with this now. And so, I mean, why, this series of events, just when things seem to be maybe there was some optimism. Now we have this. I think. To keep it in perspective, what we have is, an earthquake that perhaps over 100, 150 buildings have collapsed, and there's been, so forth, about 1,000 confirmed deaths. I'm sure there's going to be many multiples of that. But beyond that, the country more or less is intact from this, and hopefully they can come together and we can have the changes in the country and the international aid to actually make this into an opportunity to step forward. And that's what I think, people have to think about this as an opportunity. And, fortunately, what we've seen is we've seen a lot of people turning out in solidarity, people working together. It's really been quite amazing to see. We've actually seen quite a bit of citizen journalism, people putting, on the social media, documenting things. We've seen some of the media blockages lifted. For example, X had been blocked within the country. Has had been a number of independent media outlets that have been, some of those blockages have been lifted. And so So, it's not out of the question for this to actually be an opportunity for growth and for change. We'll see. It could just be the beginning, a further step in a downward cycle. But I think there is some hope that, something good could come from this.
And would that mean a resumption of a real election, even though the U.S. is preventing the most popular politician from returning to her country?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's absolutely conceivable. They have done that, but you can imagine that there's the literature on or past examples of negotiations actually suggest that you don't really want somebody with electoral aspirations to be at the head of those negotiations, because negotiations inevitably mean that you have to make compromises that can be quite unpopular. And so people that have an election in mind oftentimes do not want to make those compromising, or if they do, they end up paying the price. And so in this case, you have a leader who says she has no electoral ambitions, and I think that's true because she's not a very well-known person, not very charismatic. And if she could negotiate and we could get to some changes in the judicial system, in the electoral system, and get to elections in 2027, Maria Corina Machado could perfectly well be a candidate. And those difficult compromises that were made, she could say, "Oh, well, that wasn't me. I disagree with that. I can't believe they did that," and she wouldn't suffer at the polls. And so you could definitely imagine her running, or others running in a successful election, in 2027 at some point. And I certainly hope that that's the direction that this goes, because, this is a country that has a long democratic tradition, and people have the assumption that they can decide on the direction of their country. And Nicolas Maduro was a dictator, but he was a very unpopular dictator. People did not like that way of life, and they want to be determined their future. And I don't think anything else is really going to bring any stability to Venezuela. So hopefully, we will see some progress in the rest of the year towards this, and this will bring some renewed attention of the world towards Venezuela, and we'll see an election in 2027.
Well, David Smilde, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with David Smilde, who's a professor of human relations and senior associate at the Center for Inter-American Policy and Research at Tulane University. He has published 5 books on Venezuela and studied the country for over 34 years, living there for most of that time. And he's the co-author of The Paradox of Violence in Venezuela, Revolution, Crime and Policing During Chavismo, and is the author of the Substack Venezuela and the United States, and has an article at Responsible Statecraft, Under Team Trump's Eye, Venezuela Makes Move Towards Elections. We're going to take a brief station break, back looking into the aggressive campaign by DHS and ICE to criminalize protests against ICE cruelty in Texas and Minnesota under Trump's National Security Presidential Memo 7, under which no crime has to actually been committed, allowing millions of Americans to be swept up if they're considered to be anti-American, anti-capitalist, anti-Christian, and extremist on migration.
I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky tumbling down. I feel my heart start to trembling whenever you're around.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, David Schultz, a professor of political science at Hamline University and the University of Minnesota School of Law. He's the author of 30 books and various articles on American politics, ethics, election law, and the media, most recently Election Law and Democratic Theory, and American Politics in the Age of Ignorance, Why Lawmakers Choose Belief Over Research. And his latest book is Generational Politics in the United States, From the Silence to Gen Z and Beyond. Welcome to Background Briefing, David Schultz.
Thank you for having me again.
Well, thanks for joining us, David. And I've been covering this outrageous sentencing that took place a few days ago in Texas, in Fort Worth, the sentencing of the so-called Prairie Land Antifa, which is a complete fiction, Antifa itself. But the sentences were unbelievably draconian. One of them, Daniel Sanchez Estrada, he got 30 years, and he wasn't even at the demonstrations at the ICE facility, at detention facility in Alvarado, Texas. But he was accused of moving a box full of anti-fascist magazines the day after the protest. But nevertheless, he got 30 years. His wife got 70 years. So that in itself is just mind-boggling. But not to overshadow what's going on in your state, over a week ago, the 15 anti-ICE protesters in Minnesota, alleged by the government to be Antifa members, were indicted. And the U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, Daniel Rosen, said that this was being done under the National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM 7. He explicitly referenced that the Justice Department was using that to direct the arrests, and that the directive established a joint task force vanguard to prioritize politically motivated violence. And then in the press conference that Rosen held, he said, quote, "Today, a federal indictment was unsealed charging 15 defendants with conspiracy to impede or injure federal officers and other charges related to efforts by two Minneapolis-based Antifa groups that violently oppose the enforcement of federal law in our state." Now, this is a state in which ICE and DHS and Border Patrol murdered two American citizens. They just shot them down in the streets. We all saw it. What are they talking about in these indictments? Who has been attacking the ICE and federal officers?
Well, as far as I can tell, no one has been attacking anybody. What we've been watching here are individuals, sometimes acting alone, sometimes working with others, exercising their First Amendment rights to basically protest the federal government, to also engage in First Amendment activity that allows them to what? To do observations, to follow them, and so forth like that. There's no indication that these individuals crossed the line from observation or protected free speech rights over into actual, let us say, overt activity that obstructed or impeded a federal investigation. So based upon what's going on here, there is what? No crime that's been committed. But on the other hand, as we saw in Texas, what the Trump administration is doing, the Trump Justice Department is doing, is basically targeting individuals, and in the case of Minnesota, targeting a state that refuses to back down to the activities of the federal government.
So this is a strategy of, obviously, with Todd Blanche, who's Trump's lackey, who'll do anything, regardless of what the law says, to support Trump and Trump's venom and vindictiveness. And then you've got on top of that, you got this thug, Mark Wayne Mullen, from the Senate, who's now head of DHS. It looks like this is their strategy. They've turned ICE and Border Patrol into proactively going after people that protest their activities and their cruelty and their inhumanity. And this is a new tactic. In other words, in this country, you cannot protest government cruelty.
Yeah. What's happened here is ICE has been turned into, as well as the Justice Department, into what essentially Trump's private army and private legal committee here. I mean, if we thought Pam Bondi was bad, she's worse. I rarely make this parallel, but I'll do it here. Trump has turned ICE into what? His form of his Gestapo, to go out there and to basically harass people who disagree, and this is what's happening here and across the country. The idea is to basically beat down, arrest people who want to protest. I mean, this is a tactic that we're seeing, that he's gone after people anywhere from what? Former FBI director. He's repeatedly tried to go after other prosecutors who have prosecuted him. He's vindictive, and vindictive in a way where he now has the resources of the United States government acting on his behalf to and what all pun intended, with trumped up charges to basically break people's resolve.
But the scary part of this National Security Presidential Memo 7, which Ken Klipperstein was first to reveal some time back, which is incredibly underreported. It's one of the most scary things. When it came out at the time, some people thought maybe it was aspirational, but now it's operational. And this means that the feds require no crime to actually have been committed. They only need what they call indicators. And the indicators can basically sweep up most of the country in terms of anybody that's considered anti-American, anti-capitalist, anti-Christian, or an extremist on migration. That's the broad parameters under which ICE and CPB and the Justice Department are now operating. So would you agree with me, David, that this is underreported? I mean, my God.
Yeah, mainstream media has largely ignored this. When I put mainstream media, it ranges anywhere from the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street journals, and so forth are not covering this whatsoever. But what all these tactics remind me of is the tactics that used to be used against the Communist Party and people who were member of CPUSA in the United States a long time ago, people who were student protesters and so forth, is that what would happen is that they would go out there, they would infiltrate, they would target, and they would come up with the most egregious charges for actions that are not crimes. And the reason why I mention is these 15 individuals, if you read the indictment, I mean, you read it and it's like, they're talking about saying they want to protest. They want to act in a way to basically, again, protest to challenge what the government has been doing. All of that is protected under the First Amendment. Just to remind listeners out here, there's a famous U.S. Supreme Court case that goes back to the 1960s that says that you can advocate lawless behavior, and it doesn't cross the line from advocacy until real action, until you go from your action is actually advocating what's called imminent lawlessness. And the reason why I say that, even though there's no indication here with these 15 individuals they were advocating anything illegal, but even if they were saying we want to go and actually obstruct, you can't arrest people until you actually get to the point where they're actually engaging in that obstruction of justice. Again, this is the kind of stuff that used to be used against the Communist Party and socialists in this country back in up through the 1960s, where they would basically arrest them for merely what they believed. And this is what's happening here. People are being targeted for their beliefs. What's also, I think, I'm not sure if I want to use the word humorous or whatever here, is that when you speak to the federal prosecutor in Minnesota and ask him who this group is, he can't really define who Antifa is, which actually makes a lot of sense because there is no such thing as that group. But what they're doing is prosecuting a group they cannot define for actions that are not crimes. And that really sums it up more than anything else, is that they're creating a false group, a false sense of conspiracy, a false sense of obstruction, all to basically what? Target people. And I would say, important to know, targeting them in anticipation of the 2026 elections.
So Trump and Miller and Mark Wayne Mullen, etc., they have a fascist police force. And they've targeted a mythical group called Antifa, which stands for anti-fascist. So why not start characterizing Trump, Miller, Mark Wayne Mullen, and all of them as pro-fascists? Mm-hmm. Because if you're against fascism, and that they're criminalizing anybody who's against fascism, so why don't we refer to Trump and company as being pro-fascist? Because they are.
Well, and that's exactly the point I was making, is that he's turned the federal government and at least turned ICE into what? His form of Gestapo. And for people who don't know the reference here, the Gestapo were the not so secret police during the Nazi regime that went out there and targeted Jews and anybody who was opposition. I mean, some people are going to say, hey, you're being a little extreme in making that argument, but I don't think we are. I mean, I think the fact that they are protesters are protesting fascism. Well, what's that old phrase here for the Trump administration? If the shoe fits, wear it. You're acting in a very fascist way in terms of what you're doing.
Right, but anti-fascists are the greatest generation, the World
Yeah,
War II generation that went and liberated Europe from the Nazis. And what, hundreds of thousands of Americans' graves are over there as a testament to the sacrifices made by the greatest generation.
mhm,
And, films have been made about it. The series, The Band of Brothers, the
right.
Saving Private Ryan. And we honor those people. They were anti-fascists. So
They were.
why doesn't it extend to the rest of us? How can we let these people get away with criminalizing political speech?
No, you're right. You're right. I mean, a couple of points here. First, just so I'm clear here, is that the protesters have a right to be against fascism in the same way that our government fought a world war against fascism. So in theory, we ought to be on the same side here. But my point also, and I think you're making the same point here too, is that what they're also now protesting, that is the protesters who were being targeted, is a Trump administration which is acting like a bunch of fascists. And again, there's an irony here. Now, many of these people who are in the Trump administration, in fact, I'll say all of them, they were not part of the greatest generation. I mean, they're the generation that came after or something like that. But clearly they are a generation, or at least a White House, I should put it this way, a White House or a Justice Department, I'll be more specific here, an administration that doesn't or has not learned the lessons of history and doesn't understand that protesting is perfectly okay, and that it's especially perfectly okay to protest a government which you disagree with. In fact, I would go even further back. I think protesting a government that you disagree with is the very essence of what the Declaration of Independence was about. It was about 250 years ago, our fear of abuse of power by a king that led us to declaring independence and arguing that a king has no right to basically challenge our rights to protest and speech. 250 years later, as the Trump administration is trying to hijack the anniversary and make it a what? I don't know, a memorial to Trump. That administration is trying to steal the core meaning away from what American independence is about.
They're trying to steal the next election.
They are trying to steal the next election, which is why we have to come back to understanding how these individuals are being targeted at a time when people are organizing both on the streets, organizing in the ballot boxes to basically take on the Trump administration at this point. And so again, think about the SAVE Act, which is an effort to try to change voting procedures and IDs. Think about Trump is trying to nationalize the elections to take control of them. Think about the political activities going on here. This is all part of a broader picture to suppress democratic rights and democratic opposition.
And Bannon is calling upon the MAGA lowlifes, the ones that attacked the Capitol on January the 6th, 2021. He's encouraged them to show up at the polling places with guns.
Yes, he is at this point. And that's, again, yet another effort to try to intimidate people, as well as this immigration crackdown, even though the best evidence, unequivocal best evidence, is that non-citizens, I mean, and we're looking at what Powerball numbers in terms of percentages of non-citizens who vote. What I mean by that, better chance of buying a Powerball ticket than showing a non-citizen voting. But this is all part of an intimidation. If the federal government doesn't show up with guns, have his thugs show up with guns just to scare people away.
Well, that's at the heart of what Trump's about, though, isn't it? He
Yes.
has created this illusion, and so many people have bought it. The big lie is that he won the 2020 election, but the other big lie, which goes on back to his first term, remember he said when he couldn't explain why Hillary Clinton had 3+ million more in the popular vote, He said that 3 million Mexicans or 5 million Mexicans voted. He's always basically created this lie about voter fraud, that millions of illegals vote, and it's stuck with a lot of the country. And the truth of the matter is, as you point out, you got more chance of winning the mega ball or power ball or whatever it's called than you do finding somebody that shouldn't be voting.
Right. And just to reinforce this, is that this is not just me saying it. The Heritage Foundation has basically made this argument. But I want to tell a quick story here. I gave a talk recently, and one of my neighbors showed up, and she wanted to talk all about all the rampant voter fraud. And I pointed out, and she's an election judge too, and I pointed out to her all the statistics and so forth. And despite the fact she's been an election judge, never seen voter fraud, never seen like that, has seen any problem, insists that it's there. And I've reached a conclusion that one thing I said it to her at one point, and I said, believing in voter fraud is like believing in the tooth fairy. I said, there's almost nothing we can do to change people's minds. And Trump has convinced a large chunk of the population that the elections are not secure, non-citizens are voting, that the elections have been stolen. And there's probably nothing we can do, unfortunately, with all the facts we have to change that narrative because people have bought into that.
Well, David Schultz, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And again, I've been speaking with David Schultz, who's a professor of political science at Hamline University and the University of Minnesota School of Law. He's the author of 30 books and various articles on American politics, ethics, election law, and the media, most recently Election Law and Democratic Theory, and American Politics in the Age of Ignorance, Why Lawmakers Choose Belief Over Research. And his latest book is Generational Politics in the United States, From the Silence to Gen Z and Beyond. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking at how cracks are showing in Trump's white blue-collar base.
Jealous cowards try control. They distort what we say. Try to stop what we do. Yeah, but he can't do it themselves.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters. This is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Stephen Greenhouse, a senior fellow at the Century Foundation, who was previously a reporter for the New York Times from 1983 to 2014, where he covered labor in the workplace for 19 years. He also served as a business and economics reporter and a diplomatic and foreign correspondent. He's the author of The Big Squeeze, Tough Times for the American Worker, and Beaten Down, Worked Up, The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor. And his latest article at The Guardian is Cracks Are Showing in Trump's White Blue-Collar Base. Welcome to Background Briefing, Stephen Greenhouse.
Very nice to be here, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And as your article at The Guardian points out, in 2024, Trump won 66% of white voters without a college degree. But a new CBS News poll found that 54% of that demographic disapprove of his performance, and that was up from 45% disapproval in February before Trump's war on Iran, up sharply from 32% in February of 2025. So the writing's on the wall, I guess.
Well, first, nice to be here. Second, Trump came into office promising, I'm going to lower prices on day one. I'm not going to bring the U.S. into foreign wars the way other presidents did. And, prices did not go down on day one. And indeed, as a result of the war, prices have really shot up, especially on gasoline. As everybody knows, gasoline prices have started to come down, but they're still $1 a gallon more than when Trump began the war against Iran in late February. And big question is, Americans are pissed off about the higher gas prices. The Republicans are hoping and praying that they'll come down enough before Election Day, before the mid-year elections, that people won't be so mad at Trump and at the Republicans. Plus, the war has raised grocery prices. Coffee prices are up 17%. Beef prices are up 13%. Tomato prices are up over 30%. That's not just because of the war, it's also because of Trump's tariffs. Trump promised that his tariffs would be great, would really help, blue collar working class Americans, but they've mainly hurt blue collar working class Americans. Trump promised that I'm going to be the hero who brings back all this manufacturing, I'm going to bring back all these manufacturing jobs. And I think another reason many blue collar Americans, whether white, African American, Hispanic, Asian, are upset is that actually the number of manufacturing jobs has decreased by 68,000 since Trump returned to office. So he's promised all these things. I'm going to lower prices on day one. I'm going to bring back manufacturing jobs. I'm not going to start any foreign wars. And he's like broken all those promises. And many Americans, not just blue collar Americans and other Americans are upset with him, including many Americans who voted for him.
Well, in a way, though, Stephen, the fact that we're talking about the white working class being a part of Trump's base, isn't that a total failure of the Democrats? Because they used to be a part of the Democratic base. So when we're talking about Trump being more in trouble now with this base, the fact that he was able to catch it in the first place is pretty disgraceful and something that the Democrats surely are responsible for.
I would say disappointing more than disgraceful. So it's long been said that, and I'm sure your listeners know that the Democrats have increasingly moved from being a working class party, under the New Deal. So many non-wealthy, non-affluent Americans, rallied behind the Democrats under Franklin Roosevelt and continued that way for a generation or two. And the Democrats have increasingly become an elite, a party, for college-educated people. And the Republicans have increasingly become a party for working class Americans. And there's the book, 30, 40 years ago, What's the Matter with Kansas? That, Kansas, which is not a wealthy state, where a lot of struggling farmers, a lot of struggling small business people, a lot of struggling workers, why did they vote overwhelmingly Republican? Where the Republicans are not promising, not delivering on things that really make lives better for working class Americans. They've won on cultural issues, they were doing very well on abortion for many years. And now, their big issue is immigration, and say the Democrats have been too weak on immigration. And another issue is that the Democrats have been too woke. And the Democrats have not hammered pro-working class issues as much as they should have. The Democrats, day in and day out, should be saying we need to tax the billionaires more, to take some of that money maybe for making childcare more affordable, or for make healthcare more affordable. That the Democrats have to say we want to raise the minimum wage. Republicans, have taken many actions to make healthcare less affordable. They don't want to take actions to make it more affordable. They've blocked the extension of Obamacare subsidies. They've prevented, Biden's efforts to make childcare more affordable. They're always opposed increasing the minimum wage. Trump's done many things to hurt workers. He's attacked unions. He's reduced the bargaining power of workers. So the Democrats have to say loud and clear, working class Americans, blue collar Americans, we are your friend. Maybe we've drifted too much in recent years, but now we're going to focus increasingly on helping you, serving you, delivering to you, especially, with income inequality, the worst ever, with, trillionaires like Elon Musk having way too much economic and political power. The Democrats have to really hammer home the message that, we're going to fight for working class Americans. We're going to fight for blue collar Americans. We're going to fight for non-affluent Americans. It's so clear, that what's the main thing the Republican Party has done since Trump returned to power? They passed this big, beautiful bill, which gives massive, huge, humongous tax cuts to the rich and corporations and crumbs to middle class and blue collar Americans, while making all these cuts that will hurt non-rich Americans. They've cut Medicaid, they've cut food stamps, they've refused to extend Obamacare subsidies, and as a result, many non-rich Americans are paying $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 more a year for health insurance. And that really shows that Republicans are not the friends of workers. They're really not delivering. And the Republicans finally, pushed by the Democrats, in the House and Senate, they passed this bill, to build more housing to help make housing more affordable, and Trump is refusing to sign it. It shows that Trump's priorities are not helping typical Americans. Trump says, I'm only going to sign this bill if you, the Republicans, get rid of the filibuster and pass this bill that will make it much harder for millions and millions of Americans to vote, because Trump thinks that will help the Republicans keep control of Congress this November.
Well, that's all he cares about. It's never been America first. It's always been Trump first. And the idea that this con man and liar, that anybody should take him seriously, it's just beyond belief. But when you talk about this obnoxious billionaire bro like the Silicon Valley...
Ian, I think you're being, Trump is a very good con man. He's a great salesman.
Right.
And unfortunately, many intelligent Americans who don't watch MSNBC, who don't watch PBS, they listen to Fox, and they've been sucked into this crazy vortex where they're getting far too much fake, false, flattering information about Trump. And I think, some of them should know better, and some of them, well, that's all we hear. And then they go into their bars, and that's what they hear. They go into the diners, that's what they hear. And one of the big challenges for Democrats and for people who want to restore healthy democracy in this nation is finding a way to reach these people. And I don't think it helps to say, these people are dumb. They are part of. Unfortunately, some of them have been. I hate to use the brainwash, but they've been unduly swayed by Trump's, amazing demagogic powers. And people in France love Le Pen. Some people in Germany love the AfD, the almost neo-Nazi party, and they hammer home very successfully the issue of immigration. That immigrants are hurting people in France, immigrants are hurting people in Germany, immigrants are hurting people in Britain, and immigrants are hurting people in the United States, and they've been very successful with that issue. And in many ways, immigration, of course, helps economies grow and provides workers that economies need, especially as population growth slows. And I'm sorry, a lot of people just don't know better. They think, immigrants are taking away our jobs. Well, immigrants are often increasing the number of jobs. So, I think we have to figure out ways to reach out to Trump supporters and independents and say, you've been tricked, you've been fooled, you've been deceived, and you're knowledgeable people, and we want to provide you true facts about what's going on, not Fox's BS, not Trump's or Vance's.
Right. But Stephen, I don't think reminding people that they're suckers is going to win them over. It seems to me.
I would never call them suckers. I'm saying, I'm sorry, folks. Fox News is an arm of the Republican Party. It's an arm of Trump. All that, Fox News was founded by, Roger Ailes as an auxiliary, as an adjunct of the Republican Party, and to make clear that, what you're hearing is not true. I'm not saying you're a sucker, but you should really get the facts and listen to the truth, and don't buy into this pro-Trump propaganda that they're selling you all the time, and show how some of what Fox is saying and some of what Trump is saying are falsehoods.
Well, I was going to say about the Silicon Valley billionaire bros, and particularly you mentioned Elon Musk. To my mind, that one of the strongest things that the Democrats could run on is the combination of the Silicon Valley bros in terms of income inequality and the obnoxious nature of these people, combined with AI, which I think every working and middle-class American somewhere in their bones has a disquiet about the possibility that AI is going to put everybody out of work. And I think that the Democrats should seize on that, surely.
I agree. I mean, the Democrats have to make clear that AI is an important new technology, and it might threaten the jobs of millions of Americans. So we, the Democrats, want to help create some rules for the road to protect workers, to protect society, and Republicans are much, much more reluctant to do that.
And I spoke the other day. I covered the sweep in New York by Bandami-backed candidates, Democratic Socialists, and one of the things that came out of the conversation was the notion that apparently Democratic Socialists are more popular than the Democratic Party, according to some polls.
I
And
don't know if that's true either. That's a whole other. I mean,
yeah,
only 5% of people in New York voted. The Democratic Socialists did a fabulous job knocking on doors and getting out people to vote. And people who favor them, among the 5% who voted, they got a disproportionate number, and that's
right.
great for them. But I think
No,
by and
independents couldn't
large, I
vote.
don't know how much support they have. But
Right.
clearly, I think what happened in New York is it showed that a lot of voters are sick and tired of the status quo. They're really upset with Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries for not doing enough to fight Trump, and they want change. And I think that's the main message of the vote. I don't think people are voting for socialism. I think people are voting for change.
Well, that's exactly what I was told, that we're angry because the Democrats didn't fight sufficiently, and look what could happen. Trump came back, and it should never have happened. And of course, a lot of the blame goes for Biden and the idea that this gerontocracy in the Democratic Party just doesn't get what's happening in the real world.
I think the Democrats are increasingly getting the message that they need newer candidates. And Graham Plattner, for all his faults, and he has many faults, is a gifted public speaker. The senatorial candidate in Iowa is very good. Tallarico in Texas is a great new face. John Ossoff is a rising young star. Andy Beshear, the governor. There are new faces, and it's time for older faces like Kamala Harris to move aside and make way for young dynamic folks.
So here we are, Stephen. We're talking about splits in the Republican Party and losing the white, non-college educated voter, and now we're talking about splits in the Democratic Party. Do you think that at the end of the day, the Democrats are going to unite, and that the Republicans are going to fall apart? And is that
I think going into 2028, I think that the many Democrats will run for the presidency, and I think the Democrats will probably rally around whoever the candidate is. I think Ossoff and Bashir, would get great support. Gavin Newsom wants it. I know a lot of people don't love Gavin. He's certainly a gifted speaker, charismatic guy, very good debater. And Republicans, whether they nominate Vance or Rubio, I think generally all but the anti-Trump Republicans will rally upon them, behind them. Yeah.
So just in closing, though, the real threat and fear, as you mentioned earlier, that the housing bill is sidelined because Trump refused to sign it because he's trying to impose the Save America Act on the Republicans in order to rig the next election. Isn't that where the focus should be? Here we are celebrating the 250th year of American democracy, and we have a president who doesn't believe in democracy. He's already conducted one coup against democracy, and he's sure as hell going to do it again.
We should make clear that that Trump is trying very hard to skew the elections, and Senator John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader of South Dakota, he's been very good in fighting against this, and the top Senate Republicans, I don't always love them, but they say most Americans are against this. People, including many Republicans, many of the Republicans want to be able to vote by mail. We don't want to get rid of the filibuster because we Republicans, if we lose majority control, we want to have the filibuster. And they're basically giving the finger to Trump and saying, no, we're not going to do this. And Trump, the cheater and bully that he is, says, I'm not going to do what you in Congress want until you give me this bill that will really skew elections. And there's kind of a stalemate now, between a tug of war between Trump and Congress over that.
Well, Stephen Greenhouse, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
You're welcome. Always good to be with you.
Thank you. Again, Stephen Greenhouse is a senior fellow at the Century Foundation, who was previously a reporter for the New York Times, who covered labor and the workplace for 19 years. He also served as a business and economics reporter and a diplomatic and foreign correspondent, and he's the author of The Big Squeeze, Tough Times for the American Worker, and Beaten Down, Worked Up, The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor. And his latest article in The Guardian is Cracks Are Showing in Trump's White Blue-Collar Base. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon and Asher Price. And if you've missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can visit us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we'll include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easy for you to sign up for the daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. And you can find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media managers, Evan and Luke Susswood, are also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help us sustain this program into the future and assure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.